On behalf of Savant Wealth, I'd like to welcome everybody to Navigating Layoffs After Age 50. My name is Tracy Beard. I'm a financial advisor here with Savant. I've been here a little over 20 years, and I spend most of my time counseling families. I also serve as a mentor and a coach to financial advisors within our company. Please don't forget, if you have a couple questions, there is a Q&A button icon down at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that to suggest any questions, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like my colleague and my distinguished guest here, Teryn, to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Teryn Fitzgerald. I'm also a financial advisor with Savant in our Rockford, Illinois headquarters. And a little bit of background about myself. I've been in the financial industry for over 10 years, 8 of those with Savant. As a certified trust and financial advisor and a certified financial planner, I would like to thank you for joining us today, especially if you or someone you know are in a difficult time, like experiencing a layoff, which is the topic for our agenda today.
So we have a full agenda today. And what I want to start off by saying is I want to recognize that we have probably a variety of participants on this call. We have a pretty big number for one. And some of you may be excited about this opportunity. Maybe you're at or close to retirement, and this is presenting an opportunity to accelerate some of your goals. But unfortunately for others, we do recognize that this can also be a very scary and traumatic time as well. And a lot of times, just the unknown, the uncertainty can create a lot of fear, which can impact our health and other things in our life. So we hope to give you some really practical tips again today in our agenda that hopefully will give you some wisdom and some guidance and a framework to think through about some of these options for you. So first, recent trends. Why are we talking about this right now? So if you think back in the Great Recession, 2009 through 2020, we had a pretty strong bull market once we came out of that recession. We had very low unemployment. In fact, when I was in college, unemployment was considered 6%. In other words, there's always a few people out there that are going to be unemployed, but anything below 6% was considered highly inflationary, not necessarily a good thing for the economy. And we've been in, again, that very low environment right now. We're trending about 3.7%. But coming into 2022, when we saw inflation really emerge as a concern, and the Fed's take a number of actions, including increasing interest rates to try and slow the economy, we started to see this really impact some of the growth in technology companies. So companies like Disney, Microsoft, Salesforce, Dell, all have started to lay off some employees. It's been more or less concentrated to this point in the tech sector, but we do feel that with the lag effect we may get from the government and the interest rate increases, that we very well could see this roll into this is cyclical marketplace as well and hit more value companies. So it's timely because I think we have an opportunity here to help many people that might be facing a tough situation right now. So in terms of assessing your current financial situation, this is really kind of a key area that we want to look at. And first most important thing is really focusing on getting organized. There's a number of areas here. The first one is really just taking a snapshot of all the assets that you own and what you owe. This is called a net worth statement. And the key here is just to kind of get a list of all the assets and all the liabilities that you have and get organized. And for many of us, this is probably the first time we've ever sat down in quite some time to do this. So it can be very empowering at the same time. When we look at the next item there, creating the budget, we don't oftentimes have clients create really detailed budgets. When you're accumulating assets for eventual retirement, the one key thing that we focus on is making sure you're saving enough and accumulating enough capital in order to meet your long-term goals. And our philosophy has generally been, as long as you're accumulating assets and saving appropriately, it doesn't really matter a whole lot what you're spending that money on. However, when you're faced with a layoff, that can change pretty dramatically. Now you're in a situation where you're not sure if you'll be able to meet all those expenses. So it's really important to come back and create a detailed budget. Many of the expenses you may have had before don't exist. If you were commuting to work an hour each way, perhaps now, you're not going to have that extra, gas expense along the way. And there are certainly other expenses in our life that might go down as well throughout that process. So go and create this detailed budget. Look for your regular expenses. These are things that you normally don't have on a year in, year out basis. Look for items that you can defer. So if you have some items that you'd like to do, but you might be able to defer a year or two, that might be a good time to think about that. And really focus on the essential and your non-essential items. In terms of subscription services, in today's modern world and phones and the internet, a lot of us sign up for services and we don't really pay a lot of attention to the bills that come through each time. So it's really important to take a look at some of those. Maybe those are services you don't really need or want or use anymore, and you can save some money there. The other final component here is just thinking about savings. It's easy to get concerned and worked up when you see that income reduced, but just also recognize while you're working, a lot of your income is going both to taxes and you're probably saving money too. So in this case, we don't need to replace all of that. We don't need to necessarily have to replace all of the income. But getting a detailed budget moving forward of what your new expenses might look like can really give you some peace of mind and confidence. And then another area is looking at your debt. We're not going to talk really about strategies. We'll talk about this more towards the end of the presentation. But just getting the list of what the debt you have, what the terms are, paying particular attention to if this is fixed debt or if it's going to balloon at some point in time, we're going to get larger payments, larger expense costs. And we'll talk a little bit more about leveraging debt in again, a later section on here, but just getting the handle on the terms, how much you owe, when you're going to owe it, and if that's going to be a variable debt is really kind of key. So take the time to really get organized on these three things, and it'll really get you started off in the right path. The next slide is going to give us three more key areas. When it pertains to investment planning, I think the most important aspect here is to really just start gathering all your statements. When we see people oftentimes, maybe pre-retirement, when they're thinking about retiring, we just kind of gather all their statements. In many cases, they've got an old 401k plan, they have IRA accounts, they have different accounts with different providers. And it's really hard to understand how much risk you have overall when you have a lot of different accounts. So go ahead and gather all of your statements. This would be for you if you have a significant other, a spouse. It's important to gather those as well. And what we're going to be looking for is how much risk do you really have built in the portfolio? The secondary component of that is also looking at liquidity. In addition to understanding how much risk you have, we also want to know how liquid are your investments. I mean, do you have some that are difficult to sell? Do you have accounts that you can't tap? We want to make sure there's adequate liquidity here in this situation. So if you do have some short-term needs, we have the ability to match that up to your liabilities. The middle section here is probably, in my opinion, one of the most important. It's employee benefit planning. When you're working, you have things like health insurance, which Teryn's going to talk about in just a little while. We have disability oftentimes and life insurance and different things to help mitigate some of the major risks we have in our life. And when you lose, of course, get laid off or lose those benefits, it can have a dramatic impact if you have a claim in that regard. So it's going to be really important to sit down and understand exactly what you continue to have and what you don't have with your employee benefits. I always recommend people utilize their HR department. They're the experts. They'll help you navigate that. A third area is don't forget to negotiate. We oftentimes think the employer has all the cards, and in some cases, maybe they do, but you also have some opportunities too, and there might be an opportunity to do some negotiation in that regard. Fourth area is pay particular attention to your spouse's benefits. Again, we'll talk more about the application of this a little later, but you're not only going to want your benefits, but you're also going to want to really understand all the benefits that your spouse has available in her plan as well. And above all, take really good notes. It's going to be extremely important to take good notes throughout this process, particularly given the importance of this area. And then the final sixth area of just getting organized focuses on income sources. Do you have any part-time income? Do you have rental income? Do you have seasonal temporary work, unemployment benefits? So what are all the income sources that would be available to you? Social Security, maybe pensions could be accelerated. So these are all opportunities to take a look at and just start to know, because you're going to need this, particularly when it comes to working on some of the items that Teryn's going to talk about here in just a minute. So take the time, get organized. Again, I think you'll find it very empowering to be able to do this. It might even give you some peace of mind and security once you start to map a lot of this information out. And again, throughout our lifetime, we often don't take the time to do this because we're so busy. So this is a good time to hit the reset button.
Thanks, Tracy. So Tracy did a great job explaining the very first steps in dealing with an unexpected event like a layoff, especially after 50. I want to walk you through the importance of kind of going back to that financial plan. That's their blueprint of our financial plan and the obstacles that we might have in it. So we all know that we can make a great plan in life, but we get an unexpected curveball like laying off at 50. And, we got to go back to that plan. We don't want to say, let's just throw in the towel and never plan again. We want to be flexible in our plans and keep going back to that blueprint and brainstorm, how can we get back on track? So in the next few slides, I'm going to take you through a hypothetical couple who has just had an unexpected layoff and how working with their financial advisor let them realize what options would work for them. Okay, so this is Mason and Mandy, and they plan to retire at 60 years old. Mandy is a homemaker and Mason works in the manufacturing field, earning about 200,000 gross per year. They had worked on a financial plan for retirement that included spending $100,000 per year after taxes for living expenses. So that's going to be most things, going on vacation, paying for your utilities, all those great things. And then in addition to that, since they are retiring before 65, which is when Medicare begins, they also had to incorporate some extra premiums for healthcare. So about $20,000 to $30,000 on healthcare as well. They felt pretty confident in retiring in 10 years, but recently Mason was laid off at just 50 years old. At this point, Mason and Mandy have been impeccable savers over their lives. They have been saving and have accumulated over about $2 million between their cash and investments, and they've earmarked this for retirement. Mason was also planning to continue to save into his 401k every year, but now that he's not working, he doesn't know if that's going to be a viable thing for him to do. So after getting organized with some of the tools that Tracy had mentioned earlier, we can see that now we have a net worth put together of about $2 million. And while $2 million can seem like a pretty good nest egg, when we're looking at a 30 to 40 year plan, which is what they were planning on, and depending on their goals, it can throw the plan off just quite a bit. So we're going to look at how their financial plan started and then look at what's happening with it now. So originally, when they looked at their financial plan with their advisor, they felt very confident in the projected success in the Monte Carlo. So that's that dial that you see on the screen here that shows 96%. We call that our Monte Carlo results. Now, before I go on about how the layoff affected the plan, I do want to kind of take a minute to show you this Monte Carlo analysis, just in case you haven't seen this type of analysis before, and explain what that dial is actually showing. When we are looking at a financial plan, we have to include a set of assumptions, one of them being an unexpected or an expected rate of return and risk for a given portfolio. While our research can come up with a reasonable average rate of return over a 20 to 30 year period, we still have that unknown factor of the sequence of returns. In other words, some years we might have great markets and some years we might not, but the sequence of, good years in the beginning of a plan versus good years in or bad years in the beginning of a plan are going to have different results overall over your lifetime. So what we do is instead a Monte Carlo analysis to simulate over 1,000 different trials using the same average return and risk that we concluded from our research. And then this is going to allow us to see a probability of success under different market conditions, allowing us to answer the question, what is the probability that the money is going to last during my lifetime? We consider an in-confidence plan to be between 75 and 85%. You can see that on the slide here that the dial shows 96, which is a above confidence zone, but that in parentheses, it says 75 to 85%. And that is showing you what where we want, in this case, a hypothetical couple to be at when we're looking at a Monte Carlo result. Now, this is due to, 75 and 85% is okay due to the circumstances of, conservative assumptions that we build into a plan, but also just the lack of being able to build in and account for financial behavior. So for example, if we know that the market is down 20%, intuitively, we start spending a little bit less because of that. So factors like that make us feel pretty confident to be in the 75, 85% zone when you're looking at a Monte Carlo result. So originally you can see that Mason and Mandy had a pretty strong plan because it was above that. Okay, now that we understand what the Monte Carlo result was, let's look at how the layoff affected Mandy and Mason's plan. We can see that it dropped from being above confidence at 96% to below confidence at 29%. So in other words, if they did not earn any income or make any expense changes that we have built into the original plan, they have a high probability that they will run out of money before the end of their lifetime. Now, part of the issue is that they're having an extended state of time where they're having private insurance because, they're 50 years old now. They were planning to even retire before Medicare, but now we have an extended time before, we have 15 years before Medicare kicks in. And so typically those are going to have higher premiums associated with that. And this is a concern for a lot of retirees and people that have been laid off. So we're going to comment on healthcare a little bit later and the different options around that. But that is one major drag on the plan, and which has decreased the Monte Carlo results. Now, with talking and reviewing alternative scenarios with their advisors, Mason and Mandy felt pretty comfortable with working part-time to bridge the gap. So they decided, we think that combined gross income of maybe about $95,000 a year for the next 10 years, which is a reduction from Mason's original salary of $200,000 per year. That if we do that, we feel pretty confident that we're able to meet that requirement and bridge the gap for 10 years and not having to alter our plan in other ways. So that bridging the gap over 10 years, earning a combined income of $95,000 per year, helped move that dial up to 76%. So now the dial is not, we're entirely back where the original plan was at that 96, but we have moved it into a more financially secured plan. So now it is in that confidence zone that we mentioned earlier. They talked about, well, what if we reduce that $100,000 living expense that we were planning on in retirement? Or even today. What if we said we were going to retire at 65 instead of 60 ultimately? So they looked at all those different scenarios and they said, well, this part-time scenario is really the one that we feel the most comfortable with. And that's what is really important when you're working with a financial advisor or working on your goals, is because the plan only really works when it is meeting your specific goals, because other individuals might have chose to just reduce their living expenses or downsize their home or find another solution, but they felt that this was the most comfortable one for them. So I did talk a little bit that, private insurance can take a drain on a plan a little bit just because it tends to be more expensive than Medicare. So we're going to go into a little bit of a couple different options for an individual that is laid off. So the big one that you hear primarily when you're being laid off or if you leave your job is that COBRA is available to you. So this is going to be a continuation of the coverage with your employer. So you're usually pretty familiar how your plan works in that scenario. However, the difference is the employer might not be covering the same amount of costs. So typically your employer is paying into the premiums that you pay into as well. So there's a shared cost there. And when you're not employed anymore, that requirement kind of goes away. So you're not typically going to be, you're typically going to be paying more than you were when you were employed. You also are limited in how long you can stay on the plan. This is going to usually be up to 18 months, but sometimes there's special rules that can extend this, for example, depending on if you are close to Medicare age. So there are some reasons why it might be not 18 months, but typically it's going to be. Now on the private insurance side, these can be sold through an insurance agent or through healthcare.gov. This would be an opportunity to shop around for coverage and choose a plan that's right for you. So you can look at what the deductible is, the premiums of a plan, see what's in network. So it's a time to kind of shop around and look at a plan rather than the one that you had through your employer. Both the options might be more expensive to you than what you were paying while you were employed, though. So that's something to take into account. Now, I would like to mention that there are credits available through healthcare.gov. So you do go through healthcare.gov. Sometimes an insurance agent can help you through that as well, or your financial planner. But those credits are dependent on your expected income as well as your family size. These credits can help subsidize some of your monthly premium, or they can be received as a tax credit on your return when you file your return for that year. As you can see from this slide, monthly costs can be pretty expensive on healthcare.gov. So this chart actually does come directly from them. And this is showing, different ages here, but an individual at 50 is what we're pointing out that does not receive a subsidized credit from healthcare.gov. And that a PPO plan roughly for that one individual that's 50 years old on average is about $721 per month. Now, a lot of times we do have other dependents or a spouse that's being added to this coverage as well. So quickly that can add to these expenses. And so given the expense of the coverage, it is worth reviewing if there is a way for you to qualify for some credits to help reduce these costs. There are some planning strategies that you can review that might give you an opportunity to help with some of those costs that you see there. And in deciding between healthcare options, COBRA and private insurance, Our advice is to, evaluate what your needs really are. What are the expected costs of the plan? Do you have a doctor or a prescription that needs to be considered? Compare the out-of-pocket costs like the co-pays and the deductibles. Just review all your different options there, because this is an opportunity to, make sure the coverage is correct for you and review the cost of the plan as well. Now, we didn't mention here as well, but if you have a spouse, this could be an opportunity for your spouse that is working. If they have insurance through their employer, that is an opportunity for you to see if you can be added to that plan as well. So although it can be stressful to deal with a life-changing event like a layoff, there may be some planning opportunities that are available to you. So we're going to highlight some areas for you to review given the circumstances.
Thank you, Teryn. I refer to this section as our potpourri. So we're going to take all that information that we talked about earlier and hopefully give you some practical ideas and tips in each of these respective areas. And the first one that we're going to talk about is just reviewing those income sources. When you think of income, we've had a lot of clients utilizing some part-time income. Not only does it provide that income, but also gives them kind of some meaning and some purpose. And I think it really helps them have a happier and more successful transition, either during a layoff or into retirement. A couple of the other areas that you can think of, this of course will be dependent mostly on age, is should you elect Social Security early, for example. When you take that before your normal retirement age, oftentimes you will take a reduced penalty or reduced benefit. And you might lock that in. So we don't generally advise that, but every client is different. And then there's a lot of factors that do influence that. Things like mortality, your current health, you feel about towards the government's ability to pay that long term. So that is one area, though, that if you are over 62, you could actually take a look and consider that as an option. If we look at another area, oftentimes some people have older pension plans, and you can elect these sometimes as early as 60. Again, that may or may not be a good idea for you, but if you are not looking to go back to work at all and you need some fixed income, you can do an analysis to determine if it makes sense to take that type of income early. And of course, the final area would be any type of severance program that you can get, utilizing and incorporating that into some of your financial planning strategies. But those are 3 or 4 of the areas that we often look at for additional income sources outside the typical part-time employment income work. The next area I want to talk about is investment vehicles. So before we talk about gathering all that information, all your statements, now here we want to take a closer look at what those investments are actually doing for you, because you've got a really critical financial event. And for most of us, before we were in this position, we probably were pretty aggressive, depending on your age. You're still looking to accumulate assets for retirement. So now is a good time to take a step back and say, okay, how much risk do I really have built in my portfolio? How much do I have in higher growth equity assets, for example, or more conservative fixed income? Again, how much is liquid versus illiquid in my portfolio? Should I need to tap that? These are all really important questions. It's probably pretty reasonable to assume that you might need to scale back some of the risk in the short term. What I would caution people on and avoid is selling it all and going to cash. That can make sense under the right circumstance, but I'd say that's very seldom does that ever become a good idea. With the financial markets, just as the markets go down, they go up in a hurry too. And if you're sitting on the sidelines and you miss a really good rally in the market, you might miss all the return for that year. So really think about your portfolio, not as being needed all right now, but think of the short-term and long-term needs. You may very well have an increased income need over the next 2 to 5 years. That would be more of a short-term need. My suspicion is there's still a good portion of your investment base that you will need on a long-term basis beyond 5 years. In that case, that does suggest you have the ability to use other things outside traditional cash or fixed income investments. The third area is debt plan. We mentioned before looking at this as both debt and leverage. And when I use the term debt, I typically refer to expensive interest rates, right? Consumer credit, for example, credit cards. Usually it's secured to buy something that doesn't appreciate in value, clothes, for example. And there usually isn't a tax deductible nature to it. I don't encourage people to have much debt in that regard. Now, in the short term, it's probably okay, but I would say I would try to limit that and particularly pay attention to what that interest rate is. When we get into things like leverage, though, this is where we're talking about debt where you can borrow money, usually for a long period of time. It tends to be fixed. Interest rate tends to be low, which gives you more leverage if you keep your money invested. And sometimes you do get a tax benefit from it. So I wouldn't rush out and pay off a mortgage, and you certainly could do that. But keep in mind, if you do, you probably have to take assets out of an account that you may pay taxes on, so you get something net that's less. And then even though you'll no longer have the debt payment, you also no longer have the asset to produce income. So really think about that. This is a time where they're locked in on some good low cost, mortgage leverage type debt. We don't necessarily get in a real big hurry to pay that off just because of this life transition. We want to look at that in terms of the overall financial plan. Deferring payments out and paying for an asset like that over its useful lifetime can be a good strategy, particularly at a time when maybe cash flow might be a little bit tighter. And then the fourth area deals with insurance planning. We could talk about this topic probably for hours and hours. I think the key here is, where do you start? You've got all the documents, what you have through work, maybe privately, and also what your spouse has. The next question is, what do you need? I think oftentimes people go through their working career and they buy some insurance, and they don't really look at it each year. It's easy, it comes out of your paycheck, right? But ultimately, if you do a really good job accumulating wealth, you may not have a really big need for some insurance in the future. I'm not telling you cancel insurance, don't get me wrong here. But if you do a good job, again, accumulating wealth, your need for insurance should generally go down over your lifetime. So start by taking a look at, do you need it? And once you determine if you need it, figure out what's the best way to buy it. Should I try and transition my employer plan into a personal plan? Should I maybe get my spouse's plan and buy some life insurance through her plan? Or should I go out and try and replace this in the private market and not worry so much about buying it through my employer? There is one element that's important, I think, for many people to understand is the insurance companies have a term that they call adverse selection. What that means is they like to use the law of large numbers. That's how they can price, for example, life insurance. If they insure enough people, they can say on average how many people are going to live to age 70, 75, or 80. And they can price it accordingly so they can make a profit and still offer the insurance. Typically in a work plan, if you were going to leave work and terminate your employment and take that insurance with you, the insurance companies have already figured out that the most of the time, the people that take the insurance are the ones that can't afford to get it outside, and they tend to have higher risks associated with that. So they price it more expensively. So just be aware, if you do want to keep the insurance, I'd always recommend you price it outside just your work plan, and don't cancel any, or generally it's not a good idea to cancel any insurance unless a new policy is approved and in place, because sometimes you may not be able to get the insurance or replace it in that regard if you cancel it first. So those would be the four areas. I'll turn over to Teryn and let her talk about the last three here.
Thanks, Tracy. You said we can talk about insurance for hours and hours. I think he might be alone in that one, but I'm also going to be talking about tax planning. So I don't know if I might be alone in wanting to talk about that for hours and hours, but we're going to keep it a little bit simple here. But with tax planning, now that your income has changed a little bit here because you are laid off, depending on what time in the year that you did get laid off. Obviously, if you work a full year, your income is probably a little bit similar, but if you were laid off mid-year or earlier in the year, your income might be lower just because you don't have a full year of those wages on your tax return for that year. So you might find some opportunities to maximize that lower tax bracket possibly. So I encourage you to, work with your accountant, with your financial planner to review if any tax credits are available due to you having lower income. So starting there. And then is your lower income or current income, if it is lower, going to allow you to qualify for some premium tax credits for healthcare that we mentioned earlier, because those are going to be based on your income. If not, there might be some tax planning options if you do think that the layoff might be extended period of time so that next year maybe you could qualify. And then look to see if there's maybe an opportunity to convert to your IRA monies or your pre-tax monies and that are in retirement accounts to Roth in a lower tax bracket to help set you up for the future. Now we're going to look at accessing retirement funds. So especially if you're under 59 and a half, and if you have the bulk of your wealth in retirement funds, it can be a little bit difficult to get money out of those retirement funds because you don't meet that 59 and a half threshold. So you might have a penalty due if you do take money out. There are special rules that apply when you're looking at taking money out of retirement funds. One being, if you are 55, talking to your plan administrator to see if you're eligible to access your retirement plan by what's called the rule of 55 or separation of service. This will give you an opportunity to be able to take money from your 401k, for example, at 55 and before you're 59 and a half. So you'd want to just double check with the plan administrator on how to make sure that happens without penalty. Another method is if you're under 59 and a half is what's called the 72T SEPP. And that is a mouthful, but it basically allows you to take money out of your IRA. There is some complex calculations associated with this. So you do want to, again, refer to your accountant and your team of professionals to help you, decipher that all for you. And it will basically allow you to take money out of that IRA and it will make payments to you over a set period of time and giving you that opportunity to access the retirement funds without that 10% penalty that's usually associated before 59 and a half. And then this isn't commonly known, but if you do have a Roth IRA, the contributions that you make into a Roth IRA are the order that they come out first. So in other words, when you take money out of a Roth IRA, you're actually taking whatever you put in there as a contribution out first. What that means is when you take your contributions out, you can take them out without penalty, even if you are not 59 and a half. So that is an opportunity if you did need some money. Typically, we do say, preserve the Roth IRA as much as possible, but obviously in certain circumstances, it's important to be able to access those funds. And then stock options. If you do have stock options, if you are one of those lucky people that do have stock options through your employer, you want to refer to your plan document to see how this is going to be affected since you're laid off. Questions like, what are the requirements for exercising your options? How long do you have? What happens to your invested options? What type of options do you hold? Do you have ISOs or non-qualified options? Be aware if you do have ISOs or incentive stock options, they have 90 days after your termination to be exercised, or they will be converted to non-qualified, which will have quite a difference in taxes. So it's important to kind of look at that document and be aware of those dates. And it's also important to be aware of how exercising options can produce income, which will go back into that tax planning that I talked about earlier. So it should be a consideration. So sometimes we do think lower tax bracket because of a layoff, but if you have a severance package, if you're exercising stock options, you can fill up that tax bracket pretty quickly again. So just be aware of those different components when you are doing some of this planning. And then finally, we did want to show this slide. It just shows you some resources that might be available outside of what we talked about today, just in case you wanted to share this with someone has been laid off, or you yourself needed to have some resources available to you as well. Okay, looks like we have one here for Tracy. Should I move my investments to cash while I'm unemployed?
We talked a little bit about this earlier. The temptation there is fear kind of sets in a little bit when you have that transitionary period. You just want to kind of protect what we call the principal. But protecting the asset doesn't always mean becoming very conservative in the short term. And it's really tempting today because, as I mentioned last year, with the interest rates going up pretty significantly, you can get pretty good yields in cash right now. But keep in mind, as inflation comes down, those yields are going to come down too. So if you take those funds, you put them in a 1-year CD or 2-year CD, when that renews, you're likely going to see a much lower yield, and you may miss a really good market rally on the stock side. So again, I think short term and long term, try to parse out what you're going to need over the next 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 years. That's amounts that you could put either in fixed income, maybe and/or some type of cash or guaranteed fixed position, but then reassess that other longer term money and when that's needed. That might be money you want to keep a little bit more long term. Okay.
Great. So another one was, can I take Social Security and work part-time or full-time? So usually the earliest you can take your retirement benefit is going to be age 62. If you do take Social Security at 62, that is going to be a reduced benefit. And you can work, however, there is a threshold if you do take it before your full retirement age. Most people these days, their full retirement age is 67. But you can look that up based on your age. And 60, so if you did take it at 62 there until your full retirement age, there is a threshold of how much you can work before your benefit is reduced from Social Security. So for 2023, it's a little bit over $21,000. So if you made a little bit over $21,000 in 2023, you took Social Security and you're under your full retirement age, they would reduce your benefit for Social Security. Okay, Tracy, on my debt, should I refinance to extend the term or lower the payment or stay on current rates?
Well, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer. Obviously, this is a little specific. I would say generally my rule of thumb is if I can earn 2% more than my borrowing costs, as long as it's debt that's going to be fixed for a longer period of time, and I have the ability to make those payments, I prefer not always to pay that debt off. Now, back when mortgages were 3.5, 4%. The hurdle to earn 6% was a little bit lower. Now it's getting a little harder. We see mortgage rates hit 7%. You got to earn about 9% for me to really make that worth my while. So I'd say if you're looking at trying to extend that debt, I'd say put a premium right now on liquidity. If you have a debt in place, you might need to keep some of the cash just for other expenses if you're in between or laid off. But if you have a really good rate, I wouldn't necessarily try to terminate that debt if it's locked in and not going to move at all. However, if it's a balloon rate, that's something I would look at a little bit closer to see if it might make sense to pay that debt off, because those rates are coming up and very well could be higher in the near future here. A little personal each person, but I think the interest rate environment today gives us a little less flexibility than we had 4 or 5 years ago. Back to you, Teryn.
All right, so another one. So for the premium tax credit, which is the credit that you may receive if you're depending on your income, what is the what is that, how is that determined basically? So for the premium tax credit, it is based on your current income. So sometimes a lot of our analyses, or when you're applying for something, is going to be based on what the prior year income was, or sometimes even a little bit further than that. But for the premium tax credits, they are asking you when you file that application on healthcare.gov, what do you expect your income to be this year? And so what ends up happening is there kind of is a reconciliation when you do end up filing your return of what you said your income was versus what your income actually was. And so you would be getting the credit either on your tax return once that reconciliation is done, or go ahead and you'll have it, towards your monthly premium, but be aware that that reconciliation does happen when you file your return. As far as like the thresholds of if you qualify or not, so the Department of Health does come out with the federal poverty lines each year, and that is what they base on. I believe it's between 100% to 400% of that baseline. It's dependent on family income or family size as well. That is what it's based on as far as what your income can be for that year. I would say healthcare.gov is a good tool to be able to, you can actually even put in what you expect your income to be, and it will tell you if they expect you to have a credit or not. So it's a good tool to be able to go on there and double check if you're eligible, even without filing an application. Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. So Tracy, would you suggest equity in your home as a retirement strategy, especially if you've been laid off with not much retirement savings?
Only if you sell your house, because keep in mind, couple factors to think about here. Equity is good in your property, of course, right? It does build wealth long term, but we generally can only extract that equity if we sell that property and downsize and have available equity for income. So it doesn't really produce any income to you. The other thing I'd be cautious about right now is we've been in a pretty strong housing market. It may continue. We still have a very big shortage, but I recall back when we had the last housing boom, the pain and the fallout of seeing those prices drop 40 or 50%. So I would be cautious about utilizing a lot of that equity. If you go back and try and borrow against that, one, it's going to be more expensive because they're going to charge more interest because of the risk that they have. And if you use that money for income and then you see a depreciation value in that house, it's pretty easy to get upside down pretty quickly. So I would be really cautious of that. It's good to have that as kind of maybe an ace in the hole, just to know that if things went awry and the property value stays really high, you would have the ability maybe to downsize, extract that equity, invest it, and have a lower payment going forward in a different property. So that's a good thing to feel confident and comfortable with. I just would be pretty cautious about executing strategies around borrowing against that, leveraging it highly in this marketplace today.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending. As a reminder, there is a survey that will pop up when when the webinar ends. If you have specific questions that were not answered during the Q&A, be sure to put them in the survey questions under comments, and we'll gladly follow up with those questions. If at any time you're looking for more information about Savant, we do invite you to go to our website, savantwealth.com, to learn more. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you.